everyone, and thank you for tuning in to this episode of Reporter's Notebook. Just like every Tuesday, I am joined by fellow digital reporter Emily. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I am in a great mood because it's warm and
I
sunny
know.
outside.
Yeah, see, we were talking about this earlier. Like, I came in, like, jacket on, like, puffer jacket, ready to go, and I got in my car and I was sweating on the way over here. I was like, what the heck? It was like 30 degrees yesterday. Today it's like 60 and sunny and beautiful. It's North Carolina. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, I wanted to stay like this for a while, but
I
it's gonna be
know.
like 40s and 50s and rainy, so I'm just
I
gonna
know.
try to enjoy it as much as I can.
Exactly.
Yeah. So thank you for joining me on this evening's edition of Reporter's Notebook, Emily, because I know you got a lot to do. And one of the things that you have to do is edit our podcast
Yes.
that we just recorded. So we had a guest from the John Locke Foundation, which is a conservative but really more free market think tank that pushes policies or advises on policies and does reports on policies that fall in line, with conservative and free market values. What did you think of our guest today?
So it was a really cool conversation. Our guest is someone, who was in the reporting and broadcast business for years and years and years, and now he is a political senior analyst for the John Locke Foundation. And he spends his days really looking at state policies, trying to push agendas, trying to advocate for different policies that align with their conservative and free market think tank that they're working on. So it's really cool. And he's one of those people that, he goes on broadcast shows and gives his political expertise on different topics and things like that. So super cool to have him. He kind of started where we are now. So very cool to see someone progress up to that level and get to kind of talk about the things they get to do on a day-to-day basis.
And one of the things that I kind of want to emphasize, and we talked a little bit about this in the podcast, that there's a difference between being conservative or having conservative values and aligning with a party. So they're
Yes.
nonpartisan, which I think is something that would be beneficial to hear from during what this time is, a time of partisan politics where there seems to be a lot of passions inflamed, understandably so, because a lot of people are very passionate about their values and what policies they want to push and what they think is good for this country. So having someone who does have conservative values, and they admit that they push free market conservative policies, have him explain some of the things that have been in debate, such as the federal minimum wage. He was not for the federal minimum wage being $15 an hour, and he explained his position why. And there were also some policies, I believe there was 9 policies that he kind of laid out that he wants to see the state of North Carolina implement this year. Do you want to talk about any of those policies catch your eye?
Yeah, so one of the ones that really stood out to me, especially that they're, trying to focus on for 2021 is, ooh, excuse
Bless
me.
you.
Excuse me. I get sick when the weather changes really fast like this in North Carolina. So you can imagine I'm constantly sick because this weather is all over the place. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting how he was talking about one of their main focuses, especially for this upcoming year, is kind of limiting the governor's power when it comes to emergency situations and their power in being able to dictate and mandate all these ordinances and things like that. So I thought that was very interesting. They're really trying to kind of limit the power of the governor in these emergency situations
during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Because there's been some debate about how this pandemic is allowing is this is the debate. Whether you agree with this or not, this is one of the points that is being made by some people, is that because of the pandemic, that's allowing governments to have reasons to gain more power. And then once the pandemic ends, then they'll keep those powers. And that's something that a lot of free market conservative people, especially people at the John Locke Foundation, are saying that that's not what they're wanting to see with policies. That he gave the voting
Yes.
example where he talked about that there were a lot of policies implemented during the pandemic when it came to voting that they don't want to see the next voting cycle. Whether you agree with that or not, I think that's something that everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but at the very least, having conversations with people who are doing research and are doing reporting and are political analysts, at the very least, it's worth having. It's a conversation worth having, especially during this time of partisan politics. And Emily, we talk about this all the time. Like, we're trying to see political views from everyone's from a variety of viewpoints.
Yeah.
So I think I was very excited to have our guest join us today. He has a very interesting last name, Kokai. His name is Mitch Kokai.
Yes, we learned it. It was what was it? Hungarian.
Hungarian,
right?
Yes. And he's from Ohio.
Yeah.
But he loves the state of North Carolina. And if you want to learn more from him or about him or some of the policies at the John Locke Foundation, even if you're trying to understand what it means to be, how can you be nonpartisan yet conservative? How does that look like in government? They emphasize state government. I do have to admit, I asked some federal questions at the beginning because I was kind of interested in some of the with the Biden administration pushing stuff like the federal minimum wage. I did want to see their take on it, but they are a state emphasized what is it, political think tank. And unless, Emily, do you have anything else that you want to add?
Not that I can think of. I mean, just tune in. It's really interesting. You know, again, they kind of label themselves as a conservative think tank. I really kind of look at them more as really more moderate, if anything, with some conservative policies. But I think it's a really interesting conversation. You know, we haven't had a chance to bring on as many conservative or Republican guests onto our show. So we're always, you know, wanting to get as many variety as we can of different opinions. So definitely super excited that we got to chat with him today.
Right. And of course, as always, the guest, the listener, if you have anyone that you're wanting to hear from, a specific person, or maybe just like an expert, a specific idea that we can get an expert to talk about, please send that to Emily or I, or when you see the podcast, the podcast link is under you can go to WNCT.com. We're also on Apple and Spotify, but you can go to WNCT.com, you go to the features tab, you go to the podcast network. Yes, we have a sister podcast, the sports podcast, but there's also the political podcast, which is what we know everyone is tuning in for. And when you click each podcast, it has the little description of the podcast, and it also has at the very bottom Emily and I's email. So you can always email us with story ideas when it comes to story ideas for North Carolina, but you can also email us for topic ideas when it comes to this podcast.
Yes. I've also recently linked our Twitter accounts on there as well.
Nice.
So you guys can feel free to message us on Twitter, follow us on Twitter with any questions or ideas as well. So
of course. All right. Well, thank you so much, Emily, for joining me on this edition of Reporter's Notebook. And everyone, be sure to tune in to What the Politics. You can go to WNCT.com, click the features tab, and then the podcast network, and then you can also tune in on Apple and Spotify podcasts. All right, everyone, I hope everyone has a great evening. Bye.